Check, check. One,
Check,
two,
check,
one, two.
check, check, check.
1, 2, 1, 2.
12700.
700? We're live, Neil?
Yeah.
We're live. Hey, everybody. Guess what? Tonight is our 700th show.
Which?
And I'm going to swear and say that's fucking amazing because we didn't think we'd last 8. And we've had some amazing guests and some fantastic shows that if you go on YouTube or any podcast platform, you can check out a lot of those shows if you're like broken down in the desert or something.
We've had a lot of
yeah.
laughter.
A lot of laughs.
A lot of laughter. A lot of tears.
Quite a bit of wine.
A lot of wine.
A lot of wine. Yeah.
Had a lot of beer.
Yeah. I fell over once. That was exciting. Got driven home by the CHP one night. That was exciting.
We can't go back through all the shows.
No.
We could.
But maybe we will talk about that on a future show. But like I said, there's a lot of great shows of whether you're into surfing or skateboarding or shaping the environment,
everything,
political
politics,
endeavors.
people.
And tonight we're continuing that because tonight, and now is
I don't know how I got a hold of her. What happened?
Yeah, let's figure this out.
I don't know how that happened.
I'm going to put this right in the camera so we can see this. This is the official. I'll cover your information there.
Yeah.
There's our guest tonight.
Monterey Bay Fisheries
Melissa Mahoney.
Trust.
Yes. So the Monterey Bay Fishermen's Trust.
Fisheries Trust.
Fisheries.
Is
what? Let's start from the very beginning.
Okay. Well, it's more than a name.
First off, welcome to the show, Melissa.
Thank you so much.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure.
And we both know nothing about what you do. So
yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people here know.
I think we talked about. We know Rockhold and a couple of surfaces. Rat Boy and who else do we know? Josh Loya.
Yep.
But we actually, when you and I started talking, it wasn't even about this. It was about skateboarding because my son is super into skateboarding, and I saw on Facebook that you were doing all that stuff. So that's why I initially reached out, and then we got to chatting, and I said, "Oh, you have this show. Do you like talking about fish? Would you ever want to talk about fish?" And
well, he loves to fish. So as soon as you said fish, I'm like, I got.
Dude, it's only the 700th show. I got to remind you to hold on your microphone. Golly, people. I love fishing. Yes.
Yeah. So you were shooing.
Okay.
If you just said like, I don't know, pickleball,
you
would have been out. Right.
I had you at F.
Yeah, you have me at F.
So let's talk about what you do because I'm interested in it and knowing. And I know it has to do with our local community.
Absolutely.
And let's start right there.
Okay. Well, can I give you a little of my backstory and how I fell into the trust?
Love it.
Okay. So I am a marine scientist by training. I'm actually from Colorado, which is kind of funky. Everybody kind of laughs at the fact that I grew up in the desert as a kid who loved the ocean, but I eventually found my way out here, went to grad school in this area. Shout out to Moss Landing Marine Labs. Awesome school. And then I thought I was going to go to work and be a fisheries biologist and, work for Fish and Game or NOAA Fisheries and do that whole thing. And then my career kind of took this completely alternative path, and it had a lot to do with the fishermen that I started talking to in my first job because I had been, most all of my academic training, I'd been learning from kind of the academic side of things. And even though I was in Moss Landing and I was out on boats doing research, we never really had interaction with the fishermen. For whatever reason, it just wasn't in the program. So once I got into my work and I was researching fisheries, I started calling and finding out who the fishermen were in these different fisheries and asking them questions. And I started realizing how incredibly knowledgeable they were about the resource. And I had this mindset, really this bias that they were, they were out there overfishing and depleting and damaging habitat and, all the things you read in the papers and see on the news.
Right.
So I had this bias about them, and once I started talking to them and seeing how much they care about the ocean, that they have families and this is their job and they're trying to feed their families just like, I was trying to have my career, and they know so much about the ocean, and it's through their own direct observation and maybe a family member before them passing their observation down. And it really took me from the hardcore, kind of fisheries science aspects into what I would call human dimension aspects of fisheries. So for them, the next several years, I got involved in social science projects that were looking at documenting how the fishing communities in Central and Northern California had changed over about the last 20 years. And that was absolutely fascinating because we took all the landings data, all the economic data, and then we interviewed as many fishermen and business owners as we could. And we did this from the Port of Santa Cruz all the way up to Crescent City. So there's a port profile for each one.
What type of business were you interviewing?
What type of businesses?
You say
The fishermen, the fish buyers, the processors, the people who run the docks, the harbor masters, the gas station owners, the tackle shops, the electronic, everybody who...
Were they, because I fish and I know a lot of the guys, they're kind of salty. Were they receptive to you, like the newbie coming down the dock? Hey guys, let's talk about what you do.
Well, you can imagine they had their fun with me. They gave me a lot of grief. They they tested me. They gave me grief. I mean, I've had jobs, like I have worked for the Monterey Bay Aquarium for the Seafood Watch program. I talked to a lot of fishermen while I was doing that, and I would just sit and listen to a lot of yelling. And then if they didn't hang up on me, and once we got through that, we would usually end up having a great conversation. So
they couldn't scare you off, so they started talking to you.
I learned to have a thick skin.
Yeah,
I bet. Yeah. Well, normally they don't really want to share. They're not the most sharing of information type people.
You would think that, but you know what's funny? You just let them know that you ask one or two questions.
Like what?
Get them going.
What kind of questions would you ask?
How did you get started? Why do you care about this? What is it you like about fishing? Like, tell me about the craziest day you had on the water. What are you worried about in your in this lifestyle of this livelihood?
And you're not a commercial fisherman, so
no.
that saves a lot of the
I actually tried to be a fisheries observer a long time ago before I went to grad school, because I knew I needed to learn what it was like to be out at sea and be on boats. And I didn't know this at the time, but to be an observer, and an observer is someone that the government puts on a fishing boat to account for
stuff,
all that stuff. So because I didn't take a statistics course in college, I couldn't be an observer. I tried to get around it every which way, and this was in the 90s, and I think really they didn't want women on boats.
Right.
Because that was tricky.
Yeah.
So they found the one thing that you didn't have, and they're like, I can't do it.
Yeah. And I actually I told you I was just up in Oregon at this workshop, and we went to the Hatfield Marine Science Station, and I met the head of the observer training program there, and she became an observer, and it ended up being her whole life, and she never went to grad school. And I had the opposite thing. I couldn't be an observer, and I ended up going to grad school, and we had a good laugh over the trajectories of our lives and thinking, well, what if each of us had made a different choice? And she told me some stories about being on boats with fishermen in Alaska and like up in those remote places
a lot of cigarettes.
A lot of cigarettes and like.
I'm thinking of Jeff Denholm right now.
Oh yeah, well that's a different type of fishery.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, she used her karate, and so maybe it's a good thing I didn't end up as an observer.
Oh yeah, she had. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's like I said, they're kind of a feisty group. So you work for a nonprofit. Is it a nonprofit?
Yes.
And
okay.
So then we can kind of get moving into that and what your path has taken you to what is going on today.
Yes. So I feel absolutely blessed, and I'm thrilled to be the new executive director of this organization. It's called the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust, which is kind of a mouthful, but we got started about 8 years ago, and the primary reason that started this organization was to enable some fishing quota to be held securely for this region. And now we're going to start to get into some crazy acronyms, and I'll save that. But are you familiar with the West Coast groundfish trawl fishery?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah. Well, then we don't really have a groundfish trawl fishery here, do we?
Not anymore.
Yeah, right. Because they tore up a lot of the bottom. I know that.
Oh, okay.
And there's a lot of bycatch. And I'm just talking from not knowing, but what I've been told over the years.
That was very true in the 70s and 80s, in the early days of the fishery.
I lost 12 crab pots to one of those guys once.
I bet. I bet a lot of
I was really excited. That's a lot of money when you're not, rich.
Yeah. So the story of that fishery is like a whole nother show, and I don't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole.
That's
but
fine.
the shortest story I can say is that another conservation group called the Nature Conservancy, they in the early 2000s they bought about 13 trawl permits and vessels in order to protect habitat and sort of help shift the California boats away from trawling and into other ways of catching groundfish. Groundfish, for any of you who are saying, what the heck is groundfish? It's just the fish living near the bottom. So it's our rockfish and our flatfish. Right. So the TNC, the Nature Conservancy, they had these 13 permits, and then the trawl fishery completely transformed into a individual fishing quota system versus most all other fisheries are, they figure out every year how many fish can be caught, and then it's like a race to go out there, and when the limit is caught, then the fishery is closed, essentially. So it causes derby fishing, it causes market oversupply, and it's just a big problem. So they transitioned the trawl sector to this catch share system. So every permit holder with a history of landings was assigned a share of the different species of groundfish.
So the honest ones got extra.
Well, it was purely based on landings history. And so back to the trust. So the Nature Conservancy, because they had done this crazy buyout deal, they overnight became the second largest quota shareholder because they had these 13 permits.
Wow.
So they had 3 years to get under the caps that were set up in regulations, so that no one individual could own or monopolize the fishery. So that was the big fear of going to catch shares. And so they wanted to divest quota back into the communities where they had purchased that quota. So they did that in Morro Bay. There's a Morro Bay Community Quota Fund, and that was kind of our model to set up the Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust. And I can't even remember now why we didn't call it a quota fund. We decided to call it a trust. I think it was because we felt like for what we wanted to set up, we really wanted to hold this trawl quota and the permits in trust to, someday when the trawl fishery was on its way to turning around, there were 9 overfished rockfish stocks. Those stocks had to get rebuilt. Habitat, closed areas, the technology with the gear, keeping it off the bottom. There have just been a ton of improvements. And so the trust, our initial mission was to help revitalize the trawl fishery because it has been a hugely valuable and important fishery for the entire West Coast and for California to keep the infrastructure going, the port activity, the receivers, keep kind of the lights on. But here in Monterey, the trawlers just have really struggled to come back for various reasons. And so in the last, several years, our quota leasing program, while we continue to do that here and there, we're mainly looking out into the community and saying, okay, well, our mission is to advance sustainable, thriving fisheries and fishing communities in Monterey Bay. Full stop. That's why we exist. So aside from putting the trawl fishery aside and just saying, well, that's going to be what it's going to be, what else can we do to help? So we have put the word out on the street that we have amazing local seafood. And we have a seasonality guide. We have a consumer guide. We help people find direct purchase of seafood from off the boat sales, restaurants who are buying directly from fishermen. So we're basically trying to raise consumer awareness and choice for local sustainable seafood to support our fishermen, to help keep their prices and keep their businesses going, because they're really it's funny, the last 20 years, I'll say 40 years ago, it was the fishermen were there were a lot of them. They were catching a ton of fish and doing it in not the cleanest way.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of conservation pressure came on, and the regulations on our West Coast, between the federal and state regulations, are really strong, and almost to the point now where the fleet, the California and the West Coast fleet, has gotten so small that we're really threatened by maybe losing our fleets. They just really are having a hard time economically staying.
Well, they can't get insurance.
They can't get insurance. They're competing with cheap imported whitefish like tilapia, pollock, all these things and the local consumer, it's not their fault. 20 years ago, rockfish was overfished and it left the market. And it was right about the time when tilapia stepped in. And so, it's price. And if it tastes okay, then, people kind of forgot about it. So we're here to say, hey, we have incredible rockfish, chili pepper, widow, rockfish tacos, so yummy. And it's right here.
Well, it seems like the halibut fishery is so strong. For sport guys.
California halibut. Yes.
California halibut. Like I've been fishing a long time, and I don't really recall how the inshore halibut fishing has been so fantastic for many years now. And it just
Why is that, do you think?
Well, maybe is it the lack of the net fishing, or is it what? I mean, this is your profession.
Well, I gotta beg a pass on that because I don't study California halibut. I don't know what the trends are. I do know so the California halibut trawl fishery is entirely separate from the West Coast groundfish fishery. That's a federally managed fishery. California halibut trawl is a state managed fishery. And I do know that for Monterey Bay region, there was this little area. So state waters, like if this is our bay here, state waters go out to 3 miles. And then it becomes federal waters. And so as the kind of state boundary goes, there was like this little area that used to be halibut trawl grounds, where the small number of the state boats that had a state permit to trawl halibut, they ended up losing those grounds because they kind of redrew the boundary and basically said, oh no, this is no longer halibut trawl grounds. And there was an effort by a few folks, I would say maybe 5 or so years ago, to try and reopen that, but it just never gained speed. So there's only a few areas where the trawlers can go to target halibut.
Did anything change when the Monterey Bay became a sanctuary?
That was back in 81, 80? No, 82. It was 82 because it was the 30-year. I just went to the 30-year gala, 30-year anniversary gala a couple weeks ago. So. Gosh, I really don't know what was going on in 82.
Or 92? 92.
Oh, sorry, 92. Thank you.
That might have been a Panetta thing. Maybe
it was a Panetta thing.
Panetta was heavily involved in creating the sanctuary. And, I mean, I think really for state fisheries, I'm not sure. I know that the federal council system was implemented with the Magnuson Act, and that started in 1981. So federal fisheries management really got going in the early 80s, and I really don't know the California Fish and Game history.
How are you guys funded?
How are we funded? Yeah. Okay, all right, switching gears.
Yeah, well, I'm curious. It sounds like you're involved in a bunch of different things.
Yeah, so how is the trust funded? So we get a number of grants, government grants, philanthropic, different foundations and individual donors. Those are kind of our 3 key areas. So our seed funding came from a group of folks that came together. The city of Monterey helped, the Monterey Bay Aquarium helped, the Nature Conservancy helped, the Environmental Defense Fund helped, and then it was people from all those groups and more who gave their own time, volunteered their time. But those groups put together a pot of money that allowed us to hire a director, hire someone to man, put things together and get things going. And that person was Sherry Flummerfelt, and she just left a few months ago. And I just want to give a shout out to her because she did an amazing job with very limited resources.
What was her name again?
Sherry Flummerfeld,
Okay.
and she now is the executive director of the Western Flyer Foundation, and they are bringing the Western Flyer, the vessel that Ed Ricketts and John Steinbeck
restored.
Yeah, they're restoring it and they're bringing back to this bay. So maybe you could get her up here and have a
that'd be
chat
cool.
about that at some point. It's
Yeah.
really
Well,
cool.
I can't
program.
wait to see that boat.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You want to get the public, the consumer, to buy local fish.
Yes.
Right. So you go to Shoppers Corner, Deluxe Food, local stores. How does the consumer ask for it, or do they know what to look for? Is it labeled?
Well, so I'll just speak from myself as a resident here. When I go to New Leaf or
Right.
Shoppers or whatever, I can ask. And so New Leaf has pretty good labeling because they work with the Fishwise folks, and so you can see the fishing method, and usually they have like Oregon cod, or they actually might say the state or the area, so they're pretty good. I don't really know about staff.
But
Staff
okay.
of Life, I don't really know, but it just depends, and it depends on who their provider is and how much they consolidate and how big their distribution is.
Okay. So you're trying to get the consumer to buy local fish.
Yeah, and I would say, and grocers don't hate me, but I think unfortunately, grocer chains, especially if there's more than one store, they have to have a distribution center, and they really can't work with small boat fishermen or individual fishermen. And so if you really want local here, a more direct model is either going to the farmer's market and buying from Hans.
Go to H&H.
Go to H&H at the harbor,
yeah.
and then a lot of the fishermen have started selling off the boat,
Yeah,
and it's a little more of a word of mouth. But like just today, we posted the Aquileo is selling albacore down at Santa Cruz Harbor and in Half Moon Bay in a couple days until it runs out. And so those sorts of things, you kind of have to be in the know.
There's a boat at the ramp right now that has mahi.
But to be
Wow.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah, they just came in with tuna
Okay,
and mahi.
climate change, that's something
Yeah,
that...
well, they probably went south 300 miles, but we have a boat at the Santa Cruz ramp
they're
right
seeing
now.
Dorado up in Oregon. I heard that last week.
Well, they're catching bluefin right in the bay right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my
that's-
friend Alex
So
got
if
4 of them.
where can the consumer learn about this? Your website, or are they going to send something with the?
Yeah,
Or
so...
just word of mouth, or is there?
So yeah, if they go to our website, we have, up on the tab bar, we have something that says eat local seafood.
Okay.
And there's a drop down menu. We have a whole guide about how you can, where to buy, how to store it, how to prepare it. We have recipes.
Oh.
Because I think a lot of people, like when they think about eating fish, I don't know if it's this way anymore, but like if you're going to go out to dinner, you're going to get seafood, because a lot of people bunch of community supported fisheries. So you have your CSA, your community supported ag, your farm box that you can pre-order and get.
Right.
Well, so we have community supported fisheries, or CSFs here. And there are at least 2 off the top of 3, because Hans at H&H, he does one, and then there's Ocean to Table, and then there's Real Good Fish down in Moss Landing. And you basically can become a member. You sign up, and then you can say how much you want I want it each week. I want it every other week.
Really?
I don't want anchovies, but I'll take everything else. You can kind of pick and choose. And then those guys buy direct from the vessels up and down the coast.
Yeah.
They started here, but like Real Good Fish, and I think Ocean to Table now still, like they'll buy from Fort Bragg, because there's a lot more fish coming in up there that they can access. But I think it's mostly all California. And then Real Good Fish is actually, they can get you direct from fishermen in the Gulf and on the East Coast.
Right.
So they've kind of gone bigger, but still they work with local fishermen. And so
that's the Moss Landing guys? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I was in Santa Barbara, and I have a friend who's a commercial lobster, and they were down there buying lobsters.
There's a CSF, I'm blanking on what it's called right now. Sorry, Kim. But the commercial fishermen of Santa Barbara, their executive director, Kim Selko, she started one a few years ago. And so, yeah, there's a CSF down there. They're up and down the coast.
Can I ask you how you guys are dealing with climate change and climate change and the temperature of the waters? I mean, right now it's it's October. It's like 64 degrees out there.
Balmy.
But, right?
Yeah, I was
So
surfing
how you-
last night, and it was like, wow.
I just got the water. It's like, that's
Balmy.
toasty, right? But
Yeah.
how are you guys weathering that storm or dealing with that?
Well, I mean, I won't say we because I'm not a fisherman. So the fishermen that are out there, they're seeing changes to where the fish are. Like you were saying, the albacore haven't been here. So the fishermen who reside in Santa Cruz Harbor that usually go for salmon and then albacore,
Right.
they're having to go way up north if they want to go for albacore.
Crescent City is where they've been going.
Oh yeah, okay,
Yeah.
Crescent City. And then, so an example of where climate change is really hitting hard is the whole issue around the Dungeness crab fishery and the whale entanglement issue that has tangled up that fishery, unfortunately, because you have warm waters. We had that warm water blob for a few
Right.
years. Have you heard about that?
Mm.
So that warm water really messed up the ecosystem and the food web, and the krill that the whales depended on were not where they were supposed to be or got killed off. I don't exactly know those pieces, but essentially they couldn't find the krill, so they came closer to the coast.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there was a domoic acid
Yeah.
outbreak, so the crab fishery got delayed.
I think for the second year in a row, right?
Yeah, it's been
Yeah.
delayed for a lot
Yeah.
lately. And so it was this kind of perfect storm where the crab season got delayed, the whales got pushed in, and by the time the whales showed up coastally, the crab fishermen were running out there like crazy setting their gear because they're behind schedule. They need to make their money. So there were a ton of crab pots out there, and then the whales happened to be there too, and it was a really unfortunate situation.
And are they I'm not a commercial crab fisherman, but there changes to their season? Is that what is coming up for them?
Oh yeah, there have been major changes, and I'm just going to speak generally because I'm still wrapping my head around it, because this is working locally is a new gig for me. I started this job in August.
Okay.
And I have been involved in fisheries, but more at the national, federal level. So yeah, their seasons have been sharply curtailed, really since I would say 2018. There was a lawsuit filed by the Center for Biological Diversity, forced Fish and Wildlife to close the fishery and to create a whole new. It's called, there's a Dungeness crab working group, and then because of that lawsuit, they started something called the Risk Assessment and Mitigation Program, or RAMP. And in that group, the fishermen have worked collectively to try and figure out how they can reduce entanglements. But because of that lawsuit, they are basically allowed one take. If any gear interacts with one whale, they have to shut the fishery down. And so Fish and Wildlife does aerial surveys, like they'll start
Look for
now this
dragging
fall.
gear.
Well, no, they look for the whales.
Dragging gear. Or like it's entangled. Is that
No.
or
There's
just being in the
there's
just
no
being
gear.
in the area?
There's no gear in the water right now. So they're
Oh, right.
looking for whales, and they're like, are they coming through the area? Are they coming this way? So they're watching the distribution of the whales, and it's not until the whales start to leave that they will open the fishery. And unfortunately, lately it's been after Thanksgiving, sometimes after Christmas, and that's I
their
mean, if
season.
you remember, like,
Right.
there's nothing better than having Dungeness crab on the holiday. So they've fallen on really hard times because that was their moneymaker fishery.
Well, and I feel for those guys too, because the investment it takes to be a commercial crabber is enormous. The permit is one of the most expensive permits.
Yeah.
The gear is the most expensive gear. You have to go out. The cost of fuel. The boat is running all day long. And so I really feel for those guys losing because of the investment. And I see crab boats are for sale left and right now,
In
Yep.
Santa Cruz?
all up and down the coast.
Okay.
Yeah, because those, so those kind of smaller boat guys, they're usually salmon, crab, salmon, albacore. They'll maybe do hook and line, halibut or rockfish,
Right.
open access. So they have they're kind of like portfolio fishermen, but really salmon and crab are the big money makers. So we all know we're in an incredible drought. Every single one of our salmon stocks is threatened, endangered, or critically endangered. Every single one, even the biggest run, the the Sacramento fall Chinook, which is normally, as I understand it, I think it's the fall Chinook, has been kind of the most abundant, the one that's held the fishery up, and even that stock is in trouble because of the drought.
It's farming or fish. One's gonna win. One's gonna lose.
Well,
you know,
with climate change,
unfortunately, historically, Southern California relies on that water, and our entire Central Valley relies on that water.
Yeah,
and if they drain the water low,
Yeah, right.
the water gets too warm,
Right.
and the fish don't survive.
Right.
yeah,
And or they're the places where they normally would be laying eggs and having the fish spawn aren't dry. So that's been the problem historically. So it's a fight for the water.
Right.
The lobbying of the farmers is gigantic versus the lobbying of the fisheries, which
It
kind
is.
of brings you into that sort of. You're part of that mix.
Because you
obviously.
don't hear about the fisheries having an issue with the drought. It doesn't.
yeah. I mean, the fishermen often sort of they get the brunt of it because at the end, when the salmon aren't plentiful in the oceans, it's hard to connect back to they a lot of the eggs died because the rivers dried up, or the smolts died because trying to get out of the estuary. So what they get is sort of now the dregs, and those water issues are huge. You know, that's a political process that, little organizations like us and even the fishermen's associations have a hard time having any influence over.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
we do, and I guess this brings me to a point about back to the trust. Another part of our mission is to help educate and inform and empower fishermen themselves to be their own voice and to engage in those issues, either at the state or federal level. So in terms of us being involved in policy and advocacy, we occasionally do that. If someone wants us to write a letter in support of or take a position on, we'll consider that. But what I would rather do is help some of these younger fishermen learn about how the fishery science is collected, how the process works, so that they can show up to a management meeting and speak intelligently on behalf of themselves and their fleet. And so last week I was at this marine resource education program
In Oregon.
workshop in Oregon, just to go through it so that I could speak about it and hopefully get other fishermen involved. And every year, right now, we give 3 scholarships a year, $1,000 each, for fishermen to take a week out. They get their expenses paid by the program, but then they get to go a week and learn all about fishery science and management, because those council meetings are confusing and they're a little intimidating.
You find fishermen want to do that?
We have.
Or partake in it?
Yeah.
Well,
Almost for survival, it seems like it's gotten to that point.
The fishermen now, like in the old days, fishermen could pretty much just fish, and they would deliver, and they would get a decent price. There were enough receivers, there was enough competition. They just got to fish. They really didn't have to pay attention to much else. But now the regulations are so much more complicated. Things are changing so much faster. There are a lot more stakeholders engaged in the process, some with a lot of money and paying people to go to the meetings.
Right.
So there's an equity issue with that as well. And fishermen now have to not only know how to fish, some of them have to know how to receive their own fish, sell their own fish, work with technology, manage quota, fix the engine, go talk to a congressman.
Well, because I feel like that's always been, like, the sport community has been really. We've had years where they were going to shut salmon down. Everyone towed their boats to Sacramento and block Sacramento towing their boats.
Yeah.
Whereas the commercial guys, I've always felt like they weren't really organized, and that maybe it's getting better, and maybe organizations like yourself can help. But because the future is, and also overseas fishing too is a huge problem. Which is
competition.
Yeah,
with
don't they just want to fish, TC?
Of course they do.
They just want to fish. They don't want to get involved
and the
in all-
folks that we know, they want to surf on the good surfing days, and then go fishing on the days when the surf's flat, because the ocean's smooth, right? On those days, it's a perfect
It
lifestyle.
is a perfect combo.
Yeah,
I
it's
hadn't
pretty
thought
amazing.
about it. Did you? Well, I'll have to send it to you after. But we just put out an article on the surfer fishermen, and it featured Matt Rockhold and some other fishermen, and we even our writer
I read the
dug
article.
up
It's a good
this.
article.
Oh, thank you. Nick is such a great writer, but he dug up and found some of these guys, and I won't say their names just in case that would make them mad. But you can read the article, and there's a link to this like cult video that they made in the '90s called Monterey Purple. And it's surfing, these guys surfing and like surfing big stuff down in Carmel area against the backdrop of the 1967 Monterey Pop Festival with Jimi Hendrix playing his guitar and lighting his guitar on
Oh,
fire.
that's cool. That's neat.
They're very creative.
Well, for a lot of these guys, there is a big surf commercial fishing connection. Santa Barbara, huge because of the islands. But they wanted to figure out a way to surf more. So you can't have a 9-to-5 job and surf more, but you could fish. And during winter, it's usually much quieter. The harbor used to shoal up. You couldn't even get a boat out.
Right.
So it was a perfect yin-yang relationship with your
Maybe surfing the harbor
hobby.
mouth.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and they know the harbor guys, and they could get away with it. But
Right.
so that's important. But I feel like it's good to have organizations like yourself because the commercial fleet needs all the help they can get. A lot of them aren't MBAs, law degrees. Some of them don't even know how to text. It's like they're learning to be competitive, but they need resources like you.
As you drive over the harbor, you look down, you see all the fishing boats there. Is the state of their being? Are they healthy or are they not? Are they struggling? Because it's a big part of Santa Cruz. You see it every day. You go across the harbor to Samina, and your boat's right next door.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you know, but for asking you, are they in a healthy state or?
I would.
Because the average consumer, the person who lives in Santa Cruz, they don't know. But
and the
maybe
cost
they
of
should
living
know.
in Santa Cruz, right? We all know it's you got to work your butt
I can't
off to
imagine
live here.
I can't imagine what the cost of a gallon of fuel is for a boat.
Well, no, I was just
Same
saying
as
earlier,
for car.
I'm over $500 a month for my boat slip when
Right.
it comes to electricity and my slip fee. But my take on commercial fishing has always been, it's an awesome lifestyle. It is one of the coolest things to do, as long as your rent didn't depend on it. Like, so like maybe you have another source of income. Maybe your significant other has a great 9-to-5 going on, to where it's not because fisheries close, boats aren't insured, motors blow up, they sink. I mean, there's problems, and so that's my take on commercial.
Yeah.
Fishing. It's a lifestyle. It's a choice. I think it takes a certain kind of person, maybe who doesn't want to be around people, is a really independent thinker, likes to be alone, likes to
Fix stuff.
is risk.
You're always fixing stuff.
You're always fixing stuff, working with your hands. It's a really alternative lifestyle, and there's some really creative people.
I'm sure you can count on both hands people that you know like that. I know.
Oh, they're all like that.
I know.
Yeah, every one of it totally described every commercial fisherman.
Yeah.
Right.
That's how you have to be that way. Like our friend Jason, he fishes by himself every day. It's rare that there's somebody else on the boat. You got to be cool hanging out by yourself.
And it's it used to be that there were, you'd have the skipper, the captain, and one or two crew, and now on those small boats, those guys can fish by themselves, but on the kind of larger boats like the black cod pot gear or the long line gear, a very dear fisherman who really took me under his wing and taught me a lot in the early 2000s, Joey Jones. He went out fishing by himself because he didn't want to pay a crew member, and he never came back one day. He went fishing, and they think he got caught in his gear. And
Well, that happened to Bocce. I don't know if you heard that story. He was a long line black cotter, and he was out there. He was bringing in the line, fell overboard by himself.
right, and
The boat was
kept
moving.
going-
He's out there floundering. He hooked himself. It dragged him back to the boat because he was bringing in the line.
Oh my! No, I didn't.
And
know
another
that
great story about this, Dr. Greg Olsen. He's from Santa Barbara. He's my lobster fisherman.
Okay.
He used to lobster by himself. So one day he's going out to San Clemente Island, and he puts on his stove and he's gonna make his top ramen. Well, he gassed himself, went unconscious. The boat was on autopilot. ran into the island. Yeah, and he was a surfer. And he woke up, he was actually in a coma, woke up when the windows broke from the waves. It was wintertime. The windows broke. He stripped naked, threw the E-perb out, threw his surfboard out, and when the Coast Guard showed up, he was body surfing naked. Doesn't remember any of it.
Water.
Yeah, but like he would have, if he would have missed the island, he'd be dead. You know, and that's the risk of the risk. You know, he had
high risk, high reward.
Yeah, and so that is what happens. You know, with that. So.
You only get those stories on this show.
Okay, here's another story.
But when they get back to it, his wife said he can't fish by himself anymore.
Right. No.
Oh,
So now he has a crew. Every time there's a crew guy now. Yeah.
Okay, so here's another story that Joey Jones taught me, and it's easy if you know it, but if you don't, so it's a question, it's a test. You ready?
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Why is a crab pot round?
Oh, I don't know about that.
So it didn't go on its side? I don't know.
Any other guesses?
Why is a crab pot round?
Well, mine are hexagon.
Oh, yours are hexagon.
Yeah, I have sport gear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why is a crab pot round?
Well, if you think about how a crab walks around on the seafloor,
Yeah.
you know, it's got its back up against everything, and then it's, you know, going and going and going. So if the crab pot was square,
Yeah.
it might just go right off the edge and keep going.
Ah.
But since it's round, it goes and goes around and around until it finds the hole, and then it boop, goes into the trap and gets trapped. So that's why the fishermen made the crab pot round.
Now we know.
Because, you know, well, what's interesting about that is on the big boats in Bering Strait, they are on squares.
They are square. So
Yeah.
I think those king
Yeah,
crab
the king crab
maybe
and all those. Yeah,
move a
Dungeness.
different way.
Exactly, yeah.
But like that was one of the things when he told me that story, and I, as a master's in marine science, like not that I studied crabs, but like the fact that I couldn't figure that out, and then he told me, and I was like, well, how did you know that? And he said,
Right.
we just
Watching them in the
yeah,
boat,
why,
you know?
yeah,
watching them run
but-
around in their tank.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
an example
Yeah.
of their knowledge base and how they use that to become better fishermen.
Right.
And yeah,
It's really interesting what you do, and I'm really stoked because I have a lot of friends who commercial fish. I respect the industry. It's a huge part of the history of this town. When you think about the Santa Cruz War
this area.
and the Italians
area,
who
yeah.
came here and just took to it like none other, and the fact that it's still here and what it gives back, like the how healthy the food is. I always say Monterey Bay is, in my opinion, as healthy as it's ever been. I spent a lot of time out there, and it is absolutely a beautiful resource that we have. It's amazing.
It is. For the, salmon are in trouble. There are troubles off our waters, but our rockfish stocks, our lingcod, our halibut,
yeah.
the quality of our water by and large, except for cows.
Or, yeah.
Occasionally we get the algal blooms when the water doesn't move and it warms up. But
Right.
we have an amazing bay, and we have a cultural heritage that goes, even back before the Italians. We had the indigenous
Absolutely.
peoples using the resources here, and I hope they start to get back involved in coastal stewardship. And yeah, it's worth celebrating, and that our organization is just hoping to raise the visibility of seafood as it is part of our food security. As we start to go into this future of what is climate change going to do to the oceans, how is the national and global economy having, what's happening with energy. I mean, there's a lot of crazy stuff out there,
Right.
and part of why I decided to work for this organization is it's local, it's here, and I want to help seafood become a cornerstone of food security here in this area for our people. Make sure that everybody gets access to seafood, that we support our fishermen, that we find all the ways that we can to work together and build resilience, because we're going to need it. We're
Right.
facing an increasingly uncertain future. We need to work together and find a way to be resilient and feed everybody that's hungry here.
Yeah.
Well, I think what you were saying, like buying off the boat, like what a great way to support, the commercial
That's
fishing.
it.
Oh,
Tastes
it's
good
so
too.
fun.
And that's
Yeah.
that's a big difference in what they're getting off the boat than versus what they're selling to the distributors. Also.
Oh yeah, think of how many days.
Right, it really makes a big difference over
Yeah.
time, and so I think that that's an important message to get across, because those guys, they work so hard, and sometimes the reward is not big.
And some days it is big. That's fishing, you know. Like
Yep.
I went fishing yesterday. We got one bite, you know. So you know, some days it's good and some days it's bad, you know.
Yep.
So, but I think that's important. Is there a social media?
Yes,
Yeah, she's all over it.
Okay.
We're all on it, and
Monterey Bay Fisheries Trust.
Monterey Bay
It's on
Fisheries
Facebook,
Trust.
it's on Instagram.
Yep, hashtag Monterey Bay Seafood. We just finished up a series. We do sometimes do events to raise money for our community seafood program, which is was born out of the pandemic when fishermen were unable to sell some of their seafood into the supply chain that they were
Yeah,
used to
restaurants.
because it was disrupted, restaurants. We connected them with some of our local food banks, and we got a grant to pay them to bring the
Good.
fish to Meals on Wheels,
Yeah.
Loaves and Fishes in
Wow.
Watsonville.
Second Harvest Food Bank is, I think,
We don't work
No?
with them
Okay.
yet, but we want to expand and just work with anyone. And so it was serving two needs in
that's
a
awesome.
way that was really great. And so we do these events with restaurant partners. We had one at La Posta in September and Home Restaurant in June. We're kind of coming to the end of that, but we'll gear up and have more events next spring.
All right.
And you know, you get to meet a fisherman, hear what they have to say, taste some
they're
of the
going to
fish
meet
that
Josh
they
Lawyer.
catch.
That's it.
Well, and I think it's important because I know some of the commercial fishermen here in the harbor were talking about a certain restaurant on the beach here in Santa Cruz that doesn't buy local seafood, and they're vocal about it. And I feel like that's if I owned that restaurant and I saw that, I'd be like, wow, I think I need to buy some seafood locally,
Yeah.
and not from the not local scene.
Yeah.
And I would, I gift a fish. I have a friend who owns a restaurant. Once in a while, I will gift him a fish.
That's great.
And what he says is he goes, you know, he puts it on the menu, fresh, locally caught halibut.
Right.
And
You can't beat it.
yeah, and it's such a great way to promote the local fishery that you don't get a lot of times in restaurants. It's rare that it's like they're really blowing up the fishermen.
Yep.
And if I had a restaurant, I'm actually thinking about doing it someday. But I would have pictures of my fishermen and their boats, and
Yeah.
I would blow them up to that level
Yeah.
to where you know that you're getting the freshest fish. Because I even know on the wharf in Monterey, they're not all those people buying fish.
Oh yeah, yeah,
You know,
agreed. And
yeah.
and to their credit, like I don't want to villainize anyone. It is hard if you're running a restaurant and you're planning menus. You want to have
Right.
consistency, and unfortunately, our local stocks they go up and down, and the
Right.
supply goes up and down, and so it is really more
Difficult
of
for
a.
restaurant owner.
It's
Yeah.
difficult for chefs and restaurants to know what they're going to get, and if they have that model where they can be more spontaneous,
Right.
Yeah.
and it's a smaller venue, then often they can do that. But
But salmon's on the menu every day. Our salmon
Just
season's
not
only
our
a few-
salmon.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so that is I get that part. But I would always try to support it and blow it up, as a
Yeah,
marketing for it. You know,
Right. Right.
Keep that in mind, folks.
Melissa, thank you.
yes, thank you so much for having me.
On a
you
separate
take volunteers down there. Can people
Abs-
come and help out?
Sure. I mean, sometimes we have things to do. Sometimes we don't. Depends on if we have events. But yeah, I mean, if you're interested, we have an email. If you have an idea or a thought and you want to chat, email us at info@mbfishtrust.org and or connect. Just go to the website. Always, I'm open to ideas. I'm listening and learning. I'm still new. This is my 3rd month on the job.
Congrats.
You've taken some lumps, though, right? You've
I've-
taken some punches.
I've heard some things that the local community wants and doesn't want, and I'm mulling that over in relation to the assets and the strategy that we have, and trying to figure out, what's
Good.
how do we evolve?
You still get time to walk the docks?
I am doing that more because I'm
she
here more often.
Yeah.
And I'm actually got to go fishing. I have a friend who's got a boat in the harbor. He's a sport fisherman, and actually caught my first lingcod ever about 3 weeks
Awesome.
ago. My
Right.
son and I.
Awesome.
And so I'm hoping to get in the water more, go fishing more,
Atta girl.
go surfing more.
Yeah.
Well, walk the walk, talk the walk, whatever that is the saying
Yeah.
is. You know.
Yeah, walking the docks.
Yeah, right. And that's all that comes back to getting the trust of that community and to educate yourself.
Yep.
Like you said, how you did in the very beginning. So.
Yeah.
Well, congrats to the new position.
Thank you.
We learned a little bit today, Neil,
Yeah, that's what- no
on our
idea, no.
700th show.
Yeah. She was perfect guest. A great guest.
Yeah, awesome. I'm really proud of you
Thank you.
because
So,
it's such a unique thing we have, and it needs all the help it can get out here. And so, thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So you got shows coming up real quick, TC. You went to what? Did you go to Betty Burgers just a minute ago? You went to one of Betty Burgers?
Yes,
They
we
sponsor the show. Thanks, Lori, for the negro.
Thanks,
for
Betty.
the
Yeah,
show.
she's awesome.
Huh?
She's
Betty
awesome.
Burgers, damn, they're good.
The milkshakes.
I had one the other day. Ooh,
Yeah,
milkshake.
the milkshakes.
Do we want to discuss the future shows?
Yeah, tell
next
me.
week. Yes,
Okay.
it's coming on next week.
Is that who?
The Burlesque Girls.
Uh-oh.
Tune in next week live on Facebook to see the burlesque show.
The Burlesque Girls coming back next
I always
week.
got to break it to my wife. I'm like, oh, honey.
They've been on 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
No, I think I don't remember.
Maybe once.
Mark Andrini's coming back. Mark
Awesome.
Andrini's
One of
coming
the, I think Mark Andrini, in my opinion, is one of the most
Premier
artistic
shapers. Right.
shapers, surfboard
So
builders.
I met him before. We talked about the 50s and 60s. Now
Yep.
we're going to come on and talk about the 70s.
Can't wait.
With Mark Andrini.
Yep. Great
We've
guy.
got Gail Pellerin, who's running for state assembly,
Awesome.
and then followed by Shebra,
Yep. Supervisor. Running for
running
supervisor.
for supervisor,
Yep.
and then the next day we got Justin
Running for mayor.
running for supervisor too.
Oh, that's right. That's right. He was mayor.
He was mayor.
Yeah.
And then
It's hard to keep all
I
these
got,
guys straight.
I've got Nellie's nephew. She's coming on with the band. She's there from Santa Barbara. They're
Okay.
called Queen Tide. Really good.
Awesome.
Really good.
So
They
we got
come on the show.
Great shows.
And
coming
then
up.
we, December 6th, we
You always do this,
This
to
is
me.
gonna be
I just know it.
disco yoga.
Oh, okay. I'm ready for that.
Yeah.
Disco yoga.
We're doing
Tune in on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
Disco
All
yoga.
about it. Two of my favorite
What?
things.
Some
Yeah,
Donna
I did.
Summer and yoga. What
I
can
love
be wrong
you.
with that?
I can't wait.
Right?
Is it a contest?
We'll do a contest.
Are we doing a disco yoga contest?
Yeah. I've
Okay.
seen your moves. They're not good.
Hey, the last yoga contest we had, who won?
I don't remember.
Yeah, you remember. It was me. Killed you. Tune in for that, folks. Again,
Disco yoga.
T Fox, Santa Cruz Waves, thanks for letting us be a part of the Santa Cruz Waves family and allowing us to be on your great show and platform and being a part of it. Tune in next week. We'll have more shows, more great times. Thank you if you ever watched our shows before. Yep. It'll be on YouTube, on every platform if you want to go podcasting. And 700 shows tonight, right, Neil?
Yeah.
Woo! It's been 8.5 years or something we've done this? Wow. Amazing. We're still friends.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for tuning in.